What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up the top 10 decks of the week. That's right, and we are starting off with a brand new deck in the Shine and Revelry format that just came out in the last Ursi Day tournament, which is about 700 people, and it's Blastoise. That's right, Blastoise is back on the menu, and it's actually a pretty cool deck, and it feels very similar to the Gyarados deck, but it also feels very similar to Charizard, because Charizard, as you know, 180 HP Pokemon with a 200 damage attack that can basically sweep the game. Blastoise DX feels very similar to that as well because it has 180 HP. It's a stage 2. It's also a starter Pokemon. Not that there's any relevance there, but anyways, it basically has a base of 100 damage for 3 energy, but if it has 2 extra energy, it actually does 60 more damage, which means you're doing 160 damage. That is most likely going to knock out anything in the format anyways, and if you think of 160 as its base, it's basically the highest base damage other than Charizard in the entire game, and with a red, it's 180. We are only playing one red, but you really only need one, and there's a bunch of ways to get into it. First of all, you're going to be able to thin the deck as well as any other deck, but then you also have an Iono to play in order to try and get into the red in the next turn when you know you're going to need it. So this kind of can work very similar to Charizard. In Charizard, what you can do is you have your Moltres and then you try to put all your energy on your Charizard. In this case, your Manaphy splits the energy, so it's not as easy to do, but it doesn't really matter if you play a Misty. This player only played one Misty, and it's because I'm assuming he just wanted to see other cards more often than the Misty, and basically relied on the Manaphy being able to just do the ramp in itself. Plus, again, even if you don't have the 5 energy that you require to do the 160, being able to do 100 damage can sometimes just be enough, especially when you know you can tank a shot. Blastoise also works extremely well on curve. Your Squirtle has 1 energy requirement for 20, your Wartortle has 2 energy requirement for 40, and then your Blastoise has 3 energy requirement for 100, which means you're doing 160 by the time you get into Blastoise if you started with your Squirtle in the front. So this deck works really well in a lot of ways. One, you can actually start with any of these Pokemon in the front and be okay with it. One, obviously your Manaphy is the one you want to start with the most, but if you don't and you happen to start with Squirtle, which is the one you most likely will start with the same draw rate as Manaphy because you're both playing them at 2. Again, you play it on curve, so you can do Squirtle into Wartortle into Blastoise and do 160 damage over a course of 3 turns. That's really good. And if you start with the Articuno, if you do get a lucky Misty, you can start doing 60 damage and paralyzing your opponent's Pokemon, possibly get an early game prize, or because it has a 1 retreat cost, you can just put an energy on it, retreat, bring out the Manaphy, and then start ramping stuff up, right? Which is why I'm assuming is one of the reasons why the player chose this over the Origin Form Palkia, because the Origin Form Palkia would require a 2 energy retreat, even though it has the potential to do 120 damage and has 120 HP. Because this deck has very limited for space, there is no X-Speeds or Leafs in this deck, especially in a Water Shell where you need to be playing, in this case, 9 Pokemon and 3 cards based around your water Pokemon, 2 in Irida and 1 in Misty. Yes, we are only playing 1 Misty. And I think that's okay as well. I'm assuming the player who made this deck basically wanted to see Irida more often, as well as any other card, just more often than they wanted to see the Misty, because Manaphy can pretty much do the job anyways. And again, if you don't get into 5 energy with your Blastoise, you can just do 100 damage, or 160 over 3 turns, or 100 and then 100 again, or 100 then 160, right? And then we're playing 1 red and 1 cape. The cape is really to make sure you're just making sure that you're not getting knocked out. So I don't think you're playing the giant cape right away on any specific Pokemon. You're kind of waiting to see where you need to play it, when you need to play it, if it saves your Manaphy, if you need an extra Manaphy for an extra turn, or if your Blastoise is in range of a red, then you can put the cape down and to get it out of range. Irida is super duper good in this deck. It's super duper valuable. Being able to potentially heal multiple Pokemon first of all, at the same time. But even if it's just one Pokemon, like your Manaphy in the front, again, if you need to extend turns, or your Blastoise to get out of those ranges, or even your Articuno to get out of those ranges. And the cool thing about this, which is very similar to Gyarados versus the Charizard resemblance, is the fact that you can lose a Manaphy and then potentially bring out your Articuno if your Blastoise EX isn't set up yet, and either chip for some more damage, get some breakpoints, or get a prize, or stall the game out with paralysis. And then even if you lose the Articuno, even though you've already lost the Manaphy, now your opponent has had to go through 3 Pokemon instead of 2, whereas in like a Charizard build, you can basically just go through 2 Pokemon and you're good to go, right? So this is a brand new deck. I have played it. It is very good. It is pretty good on ranked as well. It is very still, in my opinion, very inconsistent, as most Stage 2 decks can possibly be. There's going to be games where you just completely brick and just lose the game right away, and that's going to be very frustrating in ranked, right? In tournaments, it's a little bit easier, even though this player played tremendously well. They went 11-1. In fact, in Swiss, they went 8-0, and then they went 3-1, I believe, in the playoffs. And so they went 11-1 total and only lost their last game. They got 5th place, by the way, out of like 700 people or something like that. So pretty cool. But again, in ranked, these types of decks can be extremely frustrating because, again, they're just inconsistent and they can possibly force you to brick, especially when there's so much deck space, specifically in a water shell where you need to put a certain amount of cards. Specifically in this case, again, 9 Pokemon, 2 Irida and 1 Misty, alongside the 2 Professor's Research, 2 Pokeball, 1 Communication and 1 Iono. Like, every card in here is absolutely mandatory, which basically leaves all the cards off the table. Like, you're not even playing a Serena or a Cyrus in this deck, which is kind of crazy. But honestly, as long as your Blastoise is set up and you know it's not going to get knocked out, you're basically going to sweep the game anyways. But moving on, the next deck is Charizard. This deck still is very, very strong. This is very similar to the one I play online. I actually got all the way to Ultra Ball 3 with this specific, not this specific deck, but Charizard Moltres. No Shaman, as in this case, there's no Shaman either. But this version is actually playing 2 different Charmander and 2 different Charmeleon. It's probably for a couple of reasons. One, the Charmander with Ember for 30 damage. If you're in a Gyarados matchup and you just so happen to be up against a Magikarp, you can literally just knock it out right away, putting your opponent behind, way behind, and you ahead in the prizes, and then you can just start the game off with 1 prize basically and start doing the normal Moltres rampant thing that you do, right? And then the 2 different Charmeleon is probably the same reason. You probably just want one with a higher attack in case it comes in handy, so that you can possibly knock some Pokemon out, right? I think a Charmeleon, the one from Genetic Apex for 3 energy doing 60 damage, would do 80 damage against the Kakuna, who has 80 damage because it hits for weakness, so that could be good in those matchups as well. And you might just want to do more damage against something like a Meowskarada or even a Carnivine who has 80 damage or HP as well. But the whole idea of the deck and the way I play the deck, and like I said, this got me through Ultra Ball 3 or Ultra Ball 2 into Ultra Ball 3 pretty easily, and I was actually quite surprised. The version I play, I actually don't play Leaf. I play 2 X-Speed, and I play 2 Iono and 2 Communications. So it's basically this deck, except replace the Pokemon Center Lady for a second Iono and a Leaf for an X-Speed. And it's because I want to see those cards more often or not, because I want to get into my Charizard as quickly as possible. So the whole point of this deck, think of it as like a chess game and chess pieces on a board. You basically want to get all your pieces into position to checkmate your opponent, and the way you do that with this deck is you play a Moltres in the active and a Charmander on the bench, and then nothing else. Unless you absolutely have to, you don't play anything else on the bench. You start with your, again, Moltres in the front, Charmander on the bench, and you try to evolve as quickly as possible. And so that's why I play 2 Iono and 2 Communications. So this way I'm almost guaranteeing myself to find a Charmeleon on my turn 2 to evolve it, and a Charizard on turn 3 in order to evolve it on curve. And then, of course, you just start attaching all your one energy to Moltres, and then all the Rampant onto Charizard, and then even all your additional energies you want to put on Charizard as well, in case those ramps don't go as well, the coin flips that is. And also because there's Team Rocket Grunt in the format right now, you really want to make sure that you honestly almost have like 6 instead of 5. And not only that, but even if there's no Team Rocket Grunt, this deck doesn't do tremendously well into single prize decks, because now you have to knock out 3 Pokemon, in which case you would need to basically have 6 energy on Charizard if you're going to try to knock them all out with Charizard. So yes, you want, again, Moltres in the front, Charmander on the back, no other Pokemon, evolve as quickly as you possibly can with Ionas and Communications. And then the reason I'm playing 2x speed is because, one, if you ever start with Charmander in the front, you need to get it out, so you need that, you want to see that X speed more often than not. And then once you have that 1 energy on Moltres anyways, you don't really need a leaf. All you need is an X speed. So you use an X speed and the energy on Moltres to get it out once you're finally ready to bring the Charizard in. I actually swept. I went on a massive win streak with this deck in Ultra Ball 2. I think it was like 12 games in a row. It was very, 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 very strong. But again, a stage 2 deck, even with 2 Iono and 2 Communications, there were times when I just bricked or it was very inconsistent. So you have to be ready for that as well. And then Rampardos. This one, I only put this one on the list this week because it's the only one that topped in the Ursi Day, which is the Lucario version. This is not playing any Hitmonlee or Hitmonchan. I'm surprised no Hitmonlee. At least one I thought would at least be in this deck. But it's really hard to do when you're trying to find space. I do like the one Sudowoodo. For those who play rank a lot, you'll notice that decks like Skarmory and Carnivine do extremely well because they're able to do 50 damage. Sudowoodo works very similar, being able to do 50 damage as long as it's attacking into an EX Pokemon. So those matchups that you're up against, like Darkrai-Giratina, which you're often going to see, your Sudowoodo is just going to put in a ton of work by the time your Darkrai even gets online, or their Darkrai gets online, that is. So yeah, very, very strong deck, especially with Lucario. You're going to be doing 70 damage to their opponents, any of your opponent's EX Pokemon. So very, very strong. But again, I would still like to see a 1 Hitmonlee. I'm just not really sure which card you would take out, if any at all, to be completely honest. But still very strong. I'm actually not the greatest with single prize decks. I find every time I bring them to... Every time I play a single prize deck or play against a single prize deck on rank, I always end up just getting completely smashed. But anytime I play it, I just seem to brick. I never get my Meowskarada, or I never get my Magnezone, or I never get my Rampardos, or I never start with the right Pokemon in the active, whether it's Hitmonlee, Sudowoodo, or whoever, right? But very strong deck. Obviously, we all know about Rampardos and how strong it is, and the fact that it can do 130, 150 with Lucario, and 170 with a red. So a very strong card and a very strong deck. And then we have the Meowskarada-Magnezone. This deck is still doing pretty good. It topped, I forget where it topped in the tournament, but it topped pretty high. I think like 15 or 20, top 20. And it's a top 64, so that's pretty good. Of course, Meowskarada is going to do extremely well against all the Darkrai-Giratina because Darkrai is weak to Meowskarada. And the Darkrai-Giratina was like 63% of the tops in the tournament. So basically 64 decks in the top cut, and 64% of it was Darkrai-Giratina. So obviously going to do very good. And then again, Meowskarada I think fits best when it's a full-on single prize deck, and now it has Magnezone to be able to build 2 Pokemon at the same time, have 2 Pokemon with fairly high HP, especially since we're going to be playing a Giant Cape anyways, and then get that additional damage with the red. The rest of the deck is pretty standard. This deck is super susceptible to a bunch of things. This is the one deck I think is probably one of the better single prize decks. However, is the one that I beat the most often, even with Darkrai and Giratina, simply due to the fact that it's super duper bricky on its own already, and because Sprigatito likes to search for a Pokemon at the end of the turn because of its attack, and then the turn ends. Your opponent's hand is fairly large, and if you're playing a Mars in your deck, which you should be, at least at 1, most decks are playing at 2 now. you can basically just shut them down. And then not only that, but things like other things in my deck that I play, like Dawn, allow me to attack super duper early with my Darkrai, allowing me to just get super quick knockouts on Sprigatitos, Magnetons, Magnezones, or sorry, Magnemites, Magnetons, and even Florigados. I don't know how to say it. So this deck is very susceptible to losing to very specific situations, but if it gets online and you get everything you need, this deck can absolutely just run entire games. And then, of course, Magnezone-Skarmory. Again, Skarmory with a 50 damage at the beginning of the game with a Giant Cape or a Rocky Helmet is just super duper strong. With a Rocky Helmet, you're basically guaranteed to do at least one turn of 70 damage at least. And then there's going to be points where your opponent can't even attack into you at all because they're going to get put into range or knock themselves out. So very, very strong. But again, this deck has to deal with consistency issues. So if you start with the Magnemite in the front, you're either going to have to waste a turn of energy placement to retreat it or play the one leaf that you have, which you might not want to do. This deck is also playing Origin Form Dialga, which I'm not even sure what this does. Let me actually just read the card. Flip a coin. If tails, during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. So it's actually not that great, but it's not terrible either. This deck used to play Heatran, but Heatran has 110 HP and it actually does damage to itself. Even though it does more damage, it actually does 110 damage. But I guess people needed a second big attacker in the deck, so they chose to go with Origin Form Dialga. And I don't see it too often, but I have seen it before. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, if you don't start with Skarmory in the front, it kind of sucks. And then if you don't get the curve on Magnezone, it does kind of suck as well. But at the same time, you can buy a little bit more time to get your Magnezone, considering you probably want to ramp as much as you can with your Magneton anyways. But very strong deck and very hard to beat when you have to take 3 Pokemon out, whilst they only have to take out 2 of yours. And then we have a Magnezone-Giratina deck. I actually haven't seen this deck yet at all, but it did very well in the tournament. It made a top into the top 64. I think like top 30. I think it was like top 50%. Obviously, Magnezone and Giratina being able to ramp at the same time. I'm actually surprised this deck's even playing Darkrai at all, because that means you have to play Dark Energy, which means once you start to decide to attack, if your Giratina isn't set up with enough energy, because Giratina ends the turn, whereas Magnezone doesn't. So that's the kind of the big difference between the two. I find it interesting that you would be playing Darkrai at all, especially at 1, because you have to play Dark Energy to either one attack or even get the passive damage with Darkrai. So I'm surprised we're playing the Darkrai and not just Magnezone-Giratina, with possibly 2 Druddigon to tank and buy some time and get some passive damage. That's how I would play the deck. I would think I would play 2 Giratina, 2 Magnezone, 2 Druddigon, and then fill the rest of the deck out with supporters that are necessary to play. Dawn makes a ton of sense, by the way. You can build your Darkrai or your Giratina in the front, and then just Dawn any of the ramped energy from either Magnezone or Giratina onto Darkrai for that 3rd energy to start attacking right away. But again, it's one of those things like once you start attacking with Dawn, you've basically given up on your Giratina, right? Because now you can no longer end your turn with the Broken Space Billow. And then we have the Greninja-Darkrai build, right? Still a very good deck. Still seeing tops in top tournaments. I've never seen this on ranked ladder, to be completely honest, but it's a very strong deck. And as you can tell, it doesn't play red because it doesn't need to, because you have an every turn red with Greninja. However, if you did play red, it'd be pretty interesting, because something like your Giratina would be able to do 130 base, 120 with the Darkrai attachment, 150, 170 with Greninja, and 190 with a red. That would basically knock out any single thing in the game. And then if you just take into account possibly 1 turn of Druddigon, That's 210 damage right there, right? So very cool and interesting deck. Ton of passive damage. I think, yes, playing one Giratina makes sense, not two. You're already super duper filled up with Pokemon that take up a ton of space in the deck. But the interesting thing is that I think it's actually better to just play it like a Greninja, Darkrai, and Druddigon deck. And if you get the Giratina, then cool, we can put it down and we can start ramping. If we don't, we just play it like the normal deck. The issue with possibly putting it down onto the bench is if you have say a Druddigon in the front, a Darkrai in the back, and a Froakie in the back, you can be Sabrina'd out super duper easily. And the whole, like, one of the best strategies about Druddigon is you get two Druddigons down, one in the active, one in the bench, so that you just can't be Sabrina'd, right? Because if they try to Sabrina, you just bring out the other Druddigon. But in this case, if they do Sabrina you and you don't have that second Druddigon because it's filled up with other Pokemon, then it kind of hurts you in a way. So, but very interesting deck, but also can be probably very inconsistent. We're not playing communication, we're only playing one Iono, but we are playing two Cyrus instead of one Cyrus and Sabrina, which makes a ton of sense because you can do a ton of passive damage. You can also snipe things with your Greninja and then Cyrus it out and then try to get the knockout like that. So pretty cool and interesting deck. I've just kind of, especially for ranked, like tournaments, again, might be a little different because you have more chances, even if you lose in Swiss rounds, to kind of come back and still make a run for a win of the tournament. Whereas on ladder, when you're trying to fight to get to Master Ball and you just can't get into that Charizard or that Blastoise or that Gallade or that Beedrill or that Meowskarada, or in this case that Greninja, it's just very frustrating. And that inconsistency, like, it kind of like it hurts, right? Like, especially if it's multiple games in a row. Like recently I just played, I think it was Charizard, trying to play it in Ultra Ball 3 now. And even though I completely ran Ultra Ball 2 with it and basically lost no games, I haven't won a game with it yet, I think, in Ultra Ball 3, because I just keep getting super duper inconsistent, or my opponent just is able to get a solid Sabrina or certain damage and breakpoints on my Pokemon before I get it fully set up with enough energies, right? So for me right now, stage 2 decks, even though you can be very strong, which makes those stage 2 cards so strong, is the fact that it's super hard to get into them, right? So once you do, you have a huge advantage, but if you don't, then you basically just lose the game. So that's the kind of thing that sucks. So I'm still focusing on the less Pokemon per deck kind of decks. And then of course Magnezone-Giratina, Darkrai-Giratina, still super duper good. This version of the deck has basically won 3 weeks in a row in the biggest tournament, which is the RCD tournament. I think 2 weeks ago, the first version that won the tournament was a little bit different than this, but this is the exact same deck that won the week prior to this, and has come out on top again. And this deck in general has won the biggest tournament 3 weeks in a row and continues to possibly be my best deck on ranked, and also the deck that I seem to believe, well, I don't seem to believe, I definitely believe is the best deck in the game. But again, it still has its issues, right? And it all comes down to matchups, like almost any deck. Again, Meowskarada matchups are very hard sometimes, but as long as you have the right card in your hand to deal with stuff, then you're good to go. And that's kind of what this deck does. This deck, specifically this version, I have not tried. I play a Team Rocket Grunt and a Dawn in my deck, so I remove one Rocky Helmet and one Potion. I only play one copy of each of those, because the Team Rocket Grunt works very well against the mirror match in this case, and the Dawn works very well as another way to just start attacking very early against single price decks to get them to stop them from being able to evolve into their basic final stage 2 Pokemon like Meowskarada or Magnezone or something like that. So again, you can also switch it up as you go along in ranked, being able to identify what decks you're seeing more often. Like there was a time where I was like, listen, I just keep running into Meowskarada and Magnezone and stuff like that. So I definitely need 2 Mars. So I started playing 2 Mars. And then I started playing this deck a lot more often. So I started playing 2 Team Rocket Grunt. And now I've just basically decided, like, listen, I'm going to split it. 1 Mars, 1 Team Rocket Grunt. And just basically cover my bases and just try to play the best I can while on ladder. But anyways, the last deck of the week is Gyarados, of course, still very good. I didn't do it last because I think it's the best number 1 deck. The number 1 deck by far is Giratina-Darkrai. But this deck is still super duper strong, and it's just it's a lot more consistent than a Blastoise or Charizard or Gallade, and has 100 HP on a stage 1, allowing you to be able to tank a shot and basically just knock out 2 Pokemon in a row. And has the upside of, even if it has to knock out 3 Pokemon, it can knock out Pokemon with Origin Form Palkia and Gyarados. Whereas something like in a Blastoise, it's a lot harder to do. And Charizard, you basically have to knock out all the Pokemon with Charizard. You can with Moltres, but it's still somewhat better to try to focus all your energy on Charizard. And this deck can also allow itself to lose 2 Pokemon before it even brings in the Gyarados EX, which is super duper good. And of course 2 Irida and sometimes mostly 2 Misty. In this case, the player who got, I think it was 2nd place or 3rd place in this week in the RC Day, decided to play a Mars, which I think makes a lot of sense as well, because you do sometimes of course, are going to see the Meowskarada matchup, which is still going to be hard to do and hard to beat, because you still have to take out 3 Pokemon, and they can take out quite a bit of your Pokemon. Especially Magnezone could basically one-shot your Origin Form Palkia, and could potentially take a shot from Gyarados with a Giant Cape. It's also good for like a Charizard or a Gallade matchup where you're trying to make sure they don't get into the Gallade. So your Mars is just going to come in super duper handy. So, and you don't really even like I wouldn't say you don't have to play communication, but because it's obviously a benefit to playing the game, but it's not like you're like worried that you're going to get a Charizard in your hand when you need the Charmeleon, or you'll have Charmeleon in your hand when you absolutely need the Charizard, right? So there is an argument to be made that you could possibly play no communication and put in that 2nd Misty, but honestly, I think Manaphy honestly does a lot on its own already, and you don't always have to worry about the Misty. I think the Misty is more just like, I'm going to be super duper cheap and hope I get those lucky coin flips at the beginning of the game to start doing a tremendous amount of tempo against my opponent. But anyways, that is it for this week's top 10 decks of the week. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and share. And as always, keep cooking.